On the afternoon of January 15, 2009, New York City moved at its usual relentless pace. The streets were crowded, horns echoed, and people hurried through the cold air. The air was icy and sharp, yet the skies above were remarkably clear, as if nature itself had painted a calm backdrop for what was to come. At LaGuardia Airport, one of the busiest hubs in America, passengers prepared for what seemed like an ordinary flight. Some were business travelers rushing home after long meetings, others were families excited to see loved ones, and many were simply moving from one city to another. U.S. Airways Flight 1549 was bound for Charlotte, North Carolina, and later Seattle. Nothing about this day seemed unusual, and for everyone boarding that plane, there was no reason to expect anything but routine. In the cockpit sat Captain Chesley Sully Sullenberger, a calm, disciplined veteran pilot whose reputation for precision was unmatched. He was 57 years old, with more than 19,000 hours in the air. Decades of training and discipline had shaped him into a man who never panicked. A pilot who carried both authority and humility. Beside him was First Officer Jeffrey Skiles, 49 years old, seasoned with thousands of hours of flight, but in his very first week handling the Airbus A320. Together, they formed a partnership of quiet confidence and trust, ready to guide 155 souls to their destination. At 3:25 p.m., boarding was completed. Inside the cabin were 150 passengers and 5 crew members, a mix of strangers, different ages, different backgrounds, yet for the next hours, they would share the same fate. Flight attendants stood calmly, demonstrating safety procedures that few ever truly paid attention to. Children tugged at seat belts, parents adjusted overhead bags, and business travelers reviewed notes or scrolled on their phones. For most, it was an ordinary winter afternoon, but within minutes, that sense of normalcy would shatter. At 3:26 p.m., Flight 1549 rolled down runway 4. The engines roared, the plane surged forward, and in seconds, it lifted into the cold January sky. The climb was smooth. The hum of engines reassured everyone. The skyline of New York spread below. Bridges, buildings, and the wide expanse of the Hudson. Passengers gazed out, some admiring the frozen landscape, others already drifting into thoughts of home or work ahead. Nothing suggested danger. Then, less than 2 minutes later, everything changed. At about 2,800 feet, the aircraft slammed into a flock of Canada geese. Large birds, each nearly 10 pounds, struck both engines with devastating force. Passengers heard loud bangs, a shudder through the cabin, then the sickening smell of smoke and burning, and then silence. The engines, once roaring, were gone. The Airbus had lost power. The familiar rhythm of flight was replaced by the eerie sound of alarms, the rushing of wind against the fuselage, and the quiet realization that something had gone terribly wrong. In the cockpit, Sully and Skiles faced one of the rarest and most dangerous situations in aviation, a dual-engine failure. An airliner without engines is no longer a machine of control. It becomes a heavy glider, dropping fast. With only minutes left to act, Sully's voice, steady but urgent, cut through the cockpit. Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is Cactus 1549. We've lost thrust in both engines. Air traffic control responded quickly, offering options: LaGuardia, Newark, Teterboro. Sully ran calculations in his mind with precision. Altitude too low, distance too far, time too short. No runway could be reached. And then came the words that would define the moment. We're gonna be in the Hudson. In the cabin, flight attendants acted with discipline. Their voices rang out. Brace. Brace. Heads down. Stay down. Passengers gripped armrests. Some held hands. Others whispered desperate prayers. Children cried softly. Some passengers froze in silence, eyes locked on the approaching river. The Hudson grew larger in the windows, a strip of steel-gray water waiting below. At 3:31 p.m., just 5 minutes after takeoff, Flight 1549 skimmed low over the George Washington Bridge, clearing cars and traffic below by less than 1,000 feet. Sully aligned the Airbus with the river. He leveled the wings. He lifted the nose. Every movement precise, measured, controlled. At 3:31 and 53 seconds p.m., the Airbus struck the Hudson River. The impact was thunderous. The fuselage slammed into the icy water, spray exploding in every direction. Passengers were thrown forward, seatbelts biting into their bodies, screams echoing through the cabin. But the aircraft did not break apart. Against every expectation, it remained intact. It floated. For a moment, there was silence, disbelief, relief. Then, the cold reality returned. Water began seeping in. The cabin filled with panic once again. Flight attendants shouted, "Leave everything. Move to the exits." Slides deployed and inflated, transforming into lifeboats. Some passengers climbed onto the wings, their shoes slipping on wet metal. Others clung to rafts, faces pale from shock and cold. The air was brutal, the water freezing, hypothermia minutes away. On both shores, New Yorkers stood in shock. From offices and apartments, from sidewalks and piers, eyes turned toward the river. Ferry captains, water taxi crews, and the Coast Guard rushed to the scene. Ordinary men and women, suddenly heroes, pulled survivors aboard. Passengers hugged strangers. Parents held children tightly. Some wept, unable to believe they were alive. By 3:55 p.m., just 24 minutes after the ditching, every single one of the 155 people had been rescued. Not a single life was lost. The world erupted in astonishment. Headlines the next morning declared, "The miracle on the Hudson." Aviation experts marveled at what had been accomplished. Never before had a jetliner landed on water like this, with all souls surviving. Investigations confirmed the truth. Sully's decision was flawless. Any attempt to return to LaGuardia or Newark would have ended in disaster. His judgment, Skiles' support, the cabin crew's discipline, and the passengers' cooperation had transformed certain tragedy into survival. In the days that followed, Captain Sullenberger became a symbol of calm under crisis. He was invited to the presidential inauguration, celebrated across America and the world. Yet he remained humble. "I was just doing my job," he said. "We were a crew. We worked together. And because of that, 155 people are alive." For the survivors, life was never the same. They formed the 1549 Club, meeting to remember the day their lives were spared. For the ferry crews, the memory carried pride, ordinary citizens who rose to the moment when it mattered most. Today, the Airbus A320 rests in the Carolinas Aviation Museum. Visitors walk beside its battered fuselage, studying the dents, the scars, the story etched into its metal. The Hudson River miracle is more than an aviation tale. It is a human story, a story of resilience, of calm in chaos, of unity and leadership. It reminds us that even in the darkest moments, hope can rise again. This is the story of Flight 1549. This is the miracle on the Hudson. You have been watching this story on True Uplift. Subscribe for more true stories that inspire the world.